Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. It's 9:44 p.m. on Sunday night, and my family is still up out there, and I can't believe it. My son-in-law has to get up at 4:30, and it's a school night. My daughter gets up around 5:30, and the kids have to be to school early tomorrow and all week because my middle granddaughter is in a play on Thursday, and they have rehearsal every morning a half an hour before school. So they have to be there. All of them have to be there early because my daughter drives them to school. Anyway, I wanted to wait for it to quiet down, but it is what it is. They're still up, and I have to be in a meeting. I get up around 3 o'clock a.m., and I have a meeting at 4 a.m. with people on the other side of the world. So anyway, it is what it is, and the title for today's talk is Essential Elements of Contracts, and the blurb goes like this. There's a whole lot of info in the freeman sovereignty movement about how to avoid being entrapped in one of the government adhesion contracts, either by saying or agreeing, I understand, or some behavior that implies agreement. All of this is total nonsense from a purely contractual viewpoint. There are specific essential elements that make a contract lawful or legal. Competency, mutual agreement, legal or lawful objective, consideration, written terms and conditions. In addition, there must not be any fraud involved, since fraud automatically makes it null and void, and there can be no coercion or threat involved. The government fails in each aspect, especially mutual agreement and written terms. Plus, all adhesion contracts from the government are fraudulent and enforced by threats for non-compliance. Today's corporate courts are criminal enterprises engaged in extortion and human slavery. They have no lawful foundation whatsoever. The reason that I selected this topic was because my friend Neil Dyer, once again, commenting on yesterday's video, he says, what if you are mistaken about what a contract is and how it is made? What if we are ignorant on where, what, how consent is given? Yes, they are adhesion contracts, but they are still valid by our consent, and we consent either by our actions or silence. They are trusting that our conditioning, wanting to fight them, through the social constructs that they have put in place, religion, the school system, the political system, will keep us ignorant and enslaved. What if we all were to learn how to create and move contracts and assert our authority doing that? What if it takes letting go of our false belief systems we cling to for the sake of being righteous and call their bluff for their presumption of claim on our living souls? There is going to be an intensity to the exchange you have with them, but are you going to be like the Japanese and be provoked to fight? Or are you going to go to peace with them and learn to contract properly without going into dishonor? They can never produce a claim, therefore it doesn't exist. Therefore there is no need to fight. Learn to hold your paramount security interest and be at peace. The Japanese were provoked into fighting by a blockade of their country. How would history have changed if they chose a different path, a path of peace? Probably the Japanese government and its people would have kept their sovereignty and not been taken over and westernized, setting up the debt structure we see today. Your assumptions and presumptions on contracting, are false and are a block to your remedy. It is time to change or die, because at some point they will come for you because you are fighting them. You still have time to wake up do it now. It's interesting what he says. Now, Neil belongs to a group of people that think that admiralty courts and maritime law, maritime courts, are gracious. And common law is strict and uncompromising. I mean, I studied the course a few years ago before I even started doing videos. So I know a little bit. I don't even remember the name of the group, but I remember what I studied. And it seemed really good at first. But then there was something that just wrenched at me, because what they were saying was basically that the system is good. And it's absolutely necessary that we have the system that we have. And it's set up by God, and we better obey it. It's, even Neil says, wait a minute, where did he say? Oh God, I can't. Oh, it doesn't exist. They can never produce a claim, therefore it doesn't exist. They have no lawful claim. Why? Because they have no lawful contract. It's not a lawful contract for them to convince our parents to sell us into indebtedness and into virtual slavery by creating a birth certificate that they can draw the remedy from. That's fraud. That's fraud. It's fraud of them to consider that we're dead and that we're incompetent. It's fraud that they create contracts requiring us to do something under threat of penalty, whether it's imprisonment, whether it's some kind of fine, where they claim that they can take our property, and they say, well, it's not, when you registered, it's not your property, it's their property. And that's fraud too, because they don't tell you when you, for example, buy a house and you sign and you create the warranty deed and you don't sign it, and they don't tell you you're supposed to sign it, and that if you don't sign it, they're going to just assume that you abandoned your property, and they're going to call it their own and charge you rent as a tenant living in your own house, even if you paid cash for it. The same as with your automobile. When you register it, it belongs to the state from their adhesion contract. And you, as long as you keep paying, Neil is saying you're consenting. Well, in a sense you are. But at the very beginning of the contract, the terms were not laid out, and you didn't know. They didn't tell you what it meant. They didn't tell you your rights. They didn't tell you, they didn't provide you the information, and I'm trying to go to another page here. They didn't provide the information necessary that is essential for any contract to exist. Now, there are various types of contracts, and I'm looking at a page called Essential Elements Valid Contractual Agreement from yahoo.com, actually. So this is mainstream stuff. It's not something that's, you know, so-called alternative news. It's mainstream. It says, although these contracts, the different types, differ in form, they must meet all of the validity requirements. The first one is legal competency. The first element of a valid contract is that both parties must demonstrate legal competency. This means that they must meet the minimum age requirements of 18 years or above in order to legally enter into a contract to protect minors, etc., etc. If one party does not meet this requirement, that party must have a legal guardian, and it will remain anyway. They cannot be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and it cannot be done with threat or fraud. There can be no fraud involved. Mutual agreement, which I think I jumped the gun on the fraud part. Mutual agreement, they both must have the terms spelled out and agree to the terms. And it must be stated in the provisions of the agreement. It must be comprehensible to both parties. It can never be vague or misleading or erroneous or awkward. There must be an offer and acceptance by the parties, and if an offer is rejected by one party, the other party must be promptly notified. listen to me. All government contracts are vague, misleading, erroneous, awkward, and fraudulent, which isn't in there, but they're fraudulent because the terms are not spelled out. It must have a legal objective. In other words, it can't be, the person who's offering the consideration must have possession of the consideration, must have the ability to do it. If the person doesn't have the ability to do it, it's an invalid contract. There has to be a legal objective, and it cannot be something that is unlawful. In other words, you can't have a contract to sell something that's not lawful to sell or not yours to sell, just as an example. Consideration. For a contract to be valid and enforceable, there must be some form of consideration involved. Anything of value, exchange of goods, whatever, money, whatever it is, there has to be something given for something else. There's an exchange of consideration and a written contract. In most cases, contracts must be written in plain English, not legalese, which is how most government contracts are written, with words that we think we know what they mean, but there's a legal meaning to it, so that the contract is vague and it's not specific, and it's purposefully deceptive and purposefully fraudulent to convince you that you have to do something, when indeed it doesn't mean you have to do it. They're making an offer, but they're making it seem like you have no choice. That's fraud when they do that. That's coercion. That's deception. Okay? The reason, oh wait a minute, here it is. If a contractual agreement is made orally and with merely a handshake, it is still a contract. However, it is not considered valid under the law, and therefore cannot be enforced by a judge in court. There has to be all of the terms and conditions spelled out specifically. Here's what we expect of you. Here's what we will provide for our expectation. There has to be a meeting of the minds. And someone that is incapable of entering into the contract, it makes the contract invalid. So a contract with an infant is an invalid contract. When an infant is sold into slavery by its parents unwittingly, it's an invalid contract. It doesn't exist. It's null and void on its very face. And it's done. It's finished. It's over. I don't know where Neil and these people get off on saying that I'm fighting, when I'm just simply telling the truth about what contracts are and about our relationship with governments and corporations. That they are all fraud is a fact. And he says they're going to come after me and arrest me. See, to Neil, God isn't in control. There is no divine justice. The criminals run the system. And if you don't abide by their system, they're going to come after you. Well, they've done that in many countries. They did that in the Soviet Union. They did that in communist China. They've done that in other places around the world, where the dissidents, the people that tell the truth, they go and they arrest them. They did that when the Europeans came to America. They killed all the shamans and the people that were the wisdom holders, except for the ones that managed to escape and live up in the mountains very high, where the Spaniards or the Europeans did not go. But in any case, what I'm saying, and I want you to understand this, fraud invalidates any attempt at making a contract. And everything corporations do is fraud, because they have no accountability and they do not lay out the terms in plain English and reach an agreement. They have these long things. They're not valid contracts because they are vague, because they are not specific, because they do not specifically tell you what what you're doing when you enter into that contract. And if they withhold any information, it voids it. Just like every mortgage or every so-called loan that you take out from a bank or a commercial institution, they don't tell you that they are actually taking the money from your account. That's your account in your name, in your straw man name. It belongs to you, but you don't know it's even there. They're withholding that information, and they're depositing your negotiable instrument. They're depositing that into their account and giving you a receipt for it, and you think the receipt is them giving you money. No, they're giving you a receipt. It's a debt instrument. They're not even giving you anything of value. They're giving you something that's a minus, not a plus. It's nothing value. So they didn't even give you consideration for what you gave them. You gave them something that they not only sell it once, they sell it at least 10 times over, so that something that's $100,000, for example, becomes $1 million in their pocket. They are legally allowed to counterfeit, which if you and I did that, we'd get our, not just our wrist slapped, we might even get our life taken away from us. Because they have legalized criminality, and they are criminals. And I'm not fighting them. I'm simply telling you the truth. That's the truth. And all of these contracts, you can learn to play their game if you want, like Neil does and like others do. You can learn to play their game in court and stuff like that. I mean, I went through some of these things of trying to learn, but let me tell you something. On the bottom line, they're committing fraud. And that's the truth. And they don't care about truth. They don't care about law. That's also the truth. And they do use threat of force, which is against the law. But they make it legal because they want their own way. And they're trying to they're operating a human slave system. They're operating an extortion racket, extorting your value from you and from every other human being on this planet. They extort your value without your consent and without even telling you what they're doing. It's all fraud. And you need to know that. And that's what we need to end in this world. We need to stop these people by whatever means it takes. Hopefully peacefully. That's what I always recommend. I'm not one for violence. But somehow we have to stop these liars from continuing the game of the matrix and the control grid that they've put in place, and that they want to tighten the noose and tighten the grip. I'm telling you the truth. You can believe it or not. And as for Neil, he's a good person. I've talked to him on the phone at least once, and I've exchanged a lot of things with him. He's not a bad person. But this idea that the system has any validity or any honor is absolutely insane. You're only in honor if you disagree with the lie, because the lie is a lie. And standing in the truth is not fighting. It's standing in the truth. And that's what we need to do. And we need to call them on their bullshit and call it what it is. Call a spade and say, hey, you're lying to me. Here's why you're lying to me. We need to learn how they are lying to us, and we need to call them on it. And that's not fighting them. That's standing in truth, and that's what we need to do. And that's all, boy, 19 freaking minutes. Anyway, thank you for listening. Namaste.